Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Reach coming to you here with episode 5 of the Mr. McMahon doc from Netflix entitled Family Business. This one we get right down to action, basically showing Vince as he's about to come out to start WrestleMania 37, and he's kind of talking about how it's got to here and how big it was. Vince opening up WrestleMania 37 was WWE like welcoming itself back out into the world. Of course, everything shut down in 2020, and they had to do WrestleMania inside of the Performance Center. WrestleMania 37 being booked for Tampa, it being outside. Everybody's kind of having questions about, would fans be able to sit together? Would fans have to be like spaced out? Were fans gonna have to sit? I remember at one point it was thought that fans were going to have to purchase a bubble, and you would sit in the bubble with the people inside of your group so you were not exposed to the people around you. What would have happened if you had to go to the bathroom, if you wanted to buy a hot dog, if you wanted to buy a Coke? I don't know, but I think that's where the bubble idea ended up getting shut down, and just saying, like, just let the fans sit in seats. I'm sure they spaced people out as much as they could. But this one threw back to an interview with Stephanie and Shane McMahon, more than likely probably from the late 90s when they were both involved in wrestling, and it was kind of like the interviewer trying to put out the story of where Shane and Stephanie came from, who they are, and just try to get a story out of them. Shane McMahon first came on the scene as like a referee. It was pretty much the first time that we were exposed to him. You can see him in some old pay-per-views as well as like some old, matches that were shown on television. Shane, kind of did a little bit of everything to learn what was going on inside of wrestling. I don't think the plans were for him to ever become a wrestler, actually wrestling a match like he did against, I think his first match was against X-Pac at WrestleMania. That might have been like his first like real match. He I think he had the European Championship at that time, so he must have won it in some sort of a schmoz somewhere along the way. Stephanie, I think we have all seen her in like the Andre the Giant shirt inside of the WWF catalog back in the day, the rocker shirt from the WWF catalog. She was in a Roddy Piper Halloween skit where she went trick-or-treating at Roddy Piper's house. She did a lot of things, but, when she first popped up, she was exposed during that Attitude style of wrestling, and she was kind of balls to the walls, and I think Vince really liked her because of the fact that she never said no to any idea that was put out there, and she pretty much would do anything. They talk about the Stephanie McMahon wedding, which was when she was actually on the show as a storyline figure of Vince McMahon's daughter. She was pretty innocent at the time. She hadn't turned heel. But, she was going out with a wrestler in storyline, Test. I always thought Test was pretty badass. I always really liked him. As the storyline progressed and, he was having matches against Triple H, there was an episode of Raw where I really thought that he was going to win the title. Even after, this storyline was done and it was like into the invasion. He ended up winning a battle royal where he would not get fired with the other WCW, ECW superstars. I really thought that he had a chance to go on a run and be somebody. I just really liked him, and I don't know why he never got to that next level. He ended up sticking around in WWE for a really long time. He was in that rebrand of ECW. That was, I don't know, what year was that? 2005, 2006, somewhere in there. So, I mean, he had a good long run in the company, and I wish he was still around, but I think it was his dabbling in like pills and stuff like that did him in. But the main storyline that Stephanie was involved in was on Monday Night Raw, when she had a wedding with Test, and Triple H pitched the idea that they really didn't know what the ending was, and the wedding idea of just Triple H, I'm sorry, of Test and Stephanie being married didn't really make sense. And he said, "What if I drugged Stephanie and took her to Vegas and we got married, and then all of a sudden I'm married to Stephanie?" And Vince loved it, and off to the races they go from there. One of those things, we haven't really dabbled into all of the Vince McMahon allegations. We are in episode 5. I'm really surprised that they haven't really popped up. It's pretty much all been about wrestling, all been about Vince, and the ups and downs that he's had in his career to this point. But they did harp on the fact that after Triple H was revealed to be the husband of Stephanie McMahon and Tess would not be able to marry, Triple H, I believe, says it's not if, but how we consummated the marriage. And that's basically saying Stephanie McMahon was drugged, and that's the only reason why she was able to go through with the wedding, and Triple H was able to say her "I do." And then I guess Triple H took her back to the hotel room and had sex with her, pretty much raped her. It just goes back into Vince in that last thing getting caught up of being basically saying that wrestling was sports entertainment, where there's no violence, there's no rape, there's no guns, and they were able to expose all three of those within a second of him saying after the wedding, it basically did the McMahon-Helmsley era, where Stephanie McMahon turned heel, went along with Triple H. Vince McMahon was so distraught over this, he just left the WWF, and that is why McMahon and Helmsley were able to use their control to basically do anything that they wanted to do at the time. It was a pretty hot angle. They said that because of the fact that they were able to, be hanging out all the time because of their storyline, is where they actually, met and got to know each other, and that's basically where they fell in love. No mention of China. Very, very surprised for a negative documentary. I guess it's more negative about the fact of, Vince. They're probably going to tear into him pretty soon about everything that's been out there in the news. But with an episode entitled Family Business, I was pretty much surprised that they had a chance to take a shot at Triple H, and they didn't take it. That sort of shows me that because of the WWE and Netflix relationship that's going to be starting at the beginning of the year, which I'm pretty sure it's already started. We've seen Netflix at Raw, and WWE has been making a lot of videos for Netflix, waiting as a countdown to Monday Night Raw being on Netflix. I'm sure Netflix didn't want to have a documentary taking a shot of pretty much one of the main executives of the company that they're going to be moving in on, but it was served up to them right there, and they didn't take it. Vince had a weird idea of the Stephanie and Triple H wedding, the actual wedding, the real one in real life, when they got married. Being on pay-per-view, as a wrestling fan, and Triple H being one of my favorite wrestlers, I don't know why anybody would want that. Maybe you watched the wedding to see what wrestlers, I know Ric Flair was in the wedding, I'm sure Randy Orton, maybe Batista, were there. What other wrestlers were in attendance that were sitting there with their wives? Maybe that's something. Maybe a female wrestling fan would have got something out of there. I'm sure it was a huge, very elegant affair. Everybody knows the story of Doc Hendricks going out there on the microphone and being pretty drunk and wanting to sing a song. And Linda made sure that somebody went and grabbed him and didn't ruin Stephanie, and we'll just call him Paul this time. Stephanie and Paul's magical night of their wedding. Linda McMahon is shown, and they talk about Linda being in wrestling. I think Linda is being known as one of the worst performers in the history of wrestling. Stephanie says that she never wanted to be on the show, in the show, about the show, and Vince just kept finding ways to put her in there. I think every Stone Cold Stunner that she's ever taken has been horrible. Every pretty much slap that she tried to slap anybody with ever never landed. Her delivery is horrible. When she stands up, I know she's supposed to be coming out of a drug state, I guess you can say, but I guess she's supposed to be faking it, to basically turn on Vince and help Trish, and help Shane, is so robotical. It's beyond the point of horrible. They talked about Trish Stratus. I'm surprised they didn't really go into how she got into wrestling, because her push to being involved in storylines with Vince McMahon was very, very fast. She came in as a valet to a tag team of Test and Albert TNA. And once that tag team was kind of like abandoned, I guess you can say, she went right to having an affair with Vince McMahon, and they would kiss and make out and grab each other's butts and weird stuff. And Trish, at that time, she kind of was just eye candy. She was learning to be a wrestler. If she was good at wrestling at that time, she wasn't really showing her skills. But once we get to like WrestleMania 18, she has a match at 18. 19, she has a match. 20, she's not on the show, but she's like a valet for the Christian and Jericho match. But like she really comes into her own in a few years, and that's pretty much what she's known. But at this time, maybe she's thinking if she doesn't go along with these storylines, she's going to lose her spot. I know that later in the documentary, it's going to pop up where Trish basically thinks that because she didn't make out with Mickie James on an episode of Monday Night Raw before WrestleMania, what year are we talking about? What year was Mickie? 22, let's say. She says that they asked her to make out with her. She said that didn't really make sense. That wasn't something that she wanted to do. And they made her lose the match and lose the title. I mean, Mickie was supposed to win that match one way or another. I don't think it makes sense for the storyline if Trish wins, but it's what Trish thought. They asked her about the barking like a dog. She thought that when they they did the barking like a dog on Monday Night Raw, it sort of played into the angle, and because of the fact that she was able to get one up on Vince at WrestleMania 17 by screwing him out of the match, it makes sense. She says it's probably the most thing in wrestling that she's ever asked about in every interview. Trish leads to talking about Sable, which doesn't really make sense because Sable was before Trish by a couple of years. But she was kind of like the original diva. She was Meltzer says that she was pretty much like when it comes to like she comes on the TV and people change to see her and see what's going on with her. The only person that was able to do that more with was Stone Cold Steve Austin at his peak. They talk about the fact that Sable disappeared from the WWE because she sued Vince and WWE for sexual harassment. She says that they were telling her to do things that she didn't want to do. I don't know if that meant behind the scenes, off camera, with the kind of things that Vince is wrapped up in right now, or if it was just like when she took her top off on Raw, or, she would walk out there and nothing but a potato sack. Maybe that's what it was about, but I think this is all up to us to kind of figure out. But Sable ends up coming back to the WWE in 2002, they ask Vince about it, and they say that, Sable comes back, and he's like, I never really knew that we had that much of a problem with Sable. He doesn't remember the lawsuit. But then they say, when she comes back, why is it that she goes into an affair with you? And Vince is like, an affair with me? And he's looking really confused. And Paul Heyman, I don't know if he's helping direct the interviews, or maybe if he's just there to fact check or help Vince, if he's ever, getting close to saying something stupid. Heyman has to, you can hear him off camera just say, storyline. And Vince is like, oh, storyline. Yeah. If Vince was thinking about a real life affair with Sable and was wondering how they knew about it, it could have been. Vince did an article with Playboy where he talked about his real life. He says that, he answered all of the interview questions as Vince McMahon, not Mr. McMahon, not in character. So when they asked him about cheating on Linda, he was honest. He talked about having affairs and realizing that they hurt his marriage and they hurt Linda. But nobody really understands why he was able to, put that out there into the ether when nobody really knew about it. Like, she wasn't putting that out on the streets. It wasn't getting exposed in television or National Geographic. What were those trash mags back in the day? I can't remember what those things were called. But they were able to make the company go public, which made them get a lot of money from selling the stock on the stock market. They said at the time, WCW just was not trying in the 2000s. They were just putting shows up, and it was just basically like they were living off of the TV money and the limited amount of tickets and merchandise they were able to sell to fans. You could just look and see that they just were not putting out a good product. They had, so many people that they thought were the bosses. They had so many ideas. Everybody was fighting amongst themselves. Everybody was just kind of doing whatever they wanted to do. And it just got to the point when the Time Warner company just decided to, it was worth it to just take the loss, sell the company. They end up selling WCW, pretty much everything that they own, contracts of the wrestlers they wanted to pick up, the wrestling, what's the word I'm looking for? All of the things that they had copyrights for, the tape library, this, that, and the other. And they only paid $2.5 million. I honestly think that, just like the pay-per-view names might be worth $1 million. If you think about it, if you own the rights to the names, you own the rights to the logos, you could be making t-shirts and hats and this, that, and the other. And that's why they said the $2.5 million Vince has probably made 100 times over. The $2.5 million was nothing. It didn't really even make sense. They just basically cut it because they didn't want to fight the fight anymore. And whatever they were able to get is whatever they were able to get. They talk about the fact that the night after the sale went public, the flight, they actually had like a party to celebrate. And then the next morning, it was just business as normal mode. And that is kind of when Vince dreamed up his next idea, which was the XFL. If you think about the WCW, selling to them and sort of saying we quit and we're going to move into the next direction, Vince didn't have anybody to fight. It's kind of one of the things that hurt the company is they didn't have any competition. It's almost like Vince dreamt up and made this XFL just so he would have competition with the NFL. The XFL was a huge success right off the gate, but after pretty much 1 week, fans were able to see that the product on the field was not good. It wasn't, they didn't have coaching or they didn't have, money behind them for anything. It just, the level of players was pretty much college players that had nowhere else to go. They were not pro players for a reason. They didn't, they weren't able to lure any free agents from the NFL to join. They weren't going out and trying to recruit college players to not enter the NFL draft to come play for them. They were supposed to be like almost a replacement league or a secondary league that funded or that fueled players into the NFL. They were supposed to be the minor leagues. If they were going to compete, it wasn't going to be right out of the gate where they just had the NFL shaking in their boots and closed. But if you watch like the USFL 30 for 30 with like Donald Trump, where he ended up killing the league because he sued the NFL, the owners knew they had to join together and they had to go out and get, that's how they signed Herschel Walker. They brought him in. They brought in Jim Kelly, Steve Young, Warren Moon. They brought in these quarterbacks that had a name from playing college ball that they knew people would want to see because they weren't into the NFL. That's probably one of the things that they could do. Because of the fact the XFL closed, they bring up the failures of Vince McMahon. At this point, the XFL was huge, but it was also a secondary company of NBC. Dick Ebersol also took a loss, so it wasn't as big as you would think. There was the hotel in Las Vegas that Vince ended up buying and thinking that he could run as a hotel, as a casino. He could have former wrestlers be like the pit bosses and like the ushers, I guess you can say, as you walk in. Give them a secondary life. He could be putting on wrestling shows inside of like a kind of like a mini coliseum inside of the hotel. But within a month, he just kind of got bored with it, and they ended up selling it. They just turned around, took the loss, and said, hey, it was a good idea, but not today. Times Square with the WWF World Restaurant, that was probably one of the biggest losses that Vince has ever had. And it was a hard time for Vince. He kind of wasn't knocking it out of the park like he was with his early WrestleMania ideas. He goes on to Bob Costas, and Bob Costas kind of like goats him into this interview, talking about how bad the NFL was and if it was a mistake. And Vince admits that Costas put him into a place in that interview where he just lost it. And Vince is talking about that he wish he could have been choking Bob Costas by the throat. Costas and Vince, for the most part, are cool. In this deal, Costas talks about the fact that he was a wrestling fan. He liked to watch wrestling back in the day. It was fun to work with WWF. They had a split around WrestleMania 7 because Costas, who worked with NBC at the time, with NBC Sports, didn't think it would be a good idea to get involved with wrestling that was using Operation Desert Storm as their main storyline with Hogan versus Slaughter. And that's sort of where they fell off. And then Costas, being involved with NBC Sports, but also being negative against the XFL for not putting out good football, Vince didn't think he was the team player. From there, we go to Hulk Hogan coming back to the WWE in 2002. Well, that would be the WWF because it was before WrestleMania. They didn't change their name till after, if I'm pretty sure. And him being welcomed back. He had the big match against The Rock. But once WrestleMania is over, we're pretty much out of the WCW invasion. The NWO would be there. They kind of split up the NWO. They got injured. Goldberg ends up coming soon after that, but the WCW invasion is pretty much done. They've soaked everything that they can out of that, even though they kind of did it at the wrong time. But the only time, if that really makes sense to you, they kind of just fell into a pit where they just were putting up wrestling shows and didn't know what to do. They needed some sort of an idea. The Attitude Era had kind of fizzled away. There was no Stone Cold Steve Austin due to injury. The Rock was going off and making movies. and the product suffered. And one of the things that, Vince, came out there and delivered a promo. He said that they needed ruthless aggression, which would lead to the John Cena debut, where, he would come out, he would have the match against Kurt Angle. Cena says the only reason why they had that match is that Undertaker wasn't able to be at the show, and that's kind of where they just put him into it, because somebody said that he would be able to have a good match. I remember Undertaker shaking Cena's hand after the match. I thought, at least that's what I've always thought happened. So I don't know how that plays in, but Cena talks about he didn't just do that one match and it was a home run right out of the gate. He talks about, he almost got fired by just not being able to deliver, and it was a thing with him rapping on a bus, Stephanie hearing it, and Stephanie having the idea that if he did it on the show, would be good. From there, I don't really know how we got off on this, but we're talking about Vince wanting to impregnate Stephanie for an angle, that would be revealed that he was the father. I always thought that if they did a storyline where Stephanie got pregnant and it was Triple H's, even if they did the breakup with WrestleMania 18 with Jericho and them going different directions, if they just put it into the world that Triple H and Stephanie have a baby. In this world, it could be a female, because female wrestling means something now. But if they would have said it was a boy in 2002, and you wait 22 years, and so that is in 2024, that'd be like now. We could have a 24-year-old rookie that they point out, and they're like, there's no way in the world that we're going to miss on this. They could have a McMahon Helmsley wrestler involved in matches right now. It would have been a payoff for the future. They would have had to really knock it out of the park. It did not work well with the Von Erichs. The character that MJF tried to play that ended up being striked from the movie because it wasn't needed was an extra Von Erich that they added to the family. They said it was a cousin. The fans figured it out. The fans hated it. And the Von Erichs had to come out and say, hey, we made a mistake. We lied to you. We'll never do it again. Let's just never talk about it. And that guy never worked for World Class ever again. Paul Heyman told the story of Shane wanting to do an idea in a booking committee meeting, and it kind of progressed that Vince didn't want to do it, and Shane kept pushing for it. And Vince tells Shane to stab him in the heart, that he'll have to kill him in order to take over the company, and then he can do what he wants to do. Shane doesn't want to do that, so basically Vince says, you're going to have to buy me out like I bought out my daddy. And if that doesn't work, you'll have to push me out. Basically, trying to get Shane to, step up to the plate and deliver. At this time, Shane ends up leaving WWE in 2009. Shane wanted to be in charge. He thought that it was time for Vince to roll out and roll the company over to him. By 2009, I'm pretty sure that it felt like, and I remember reading that it was pretty well known that Stephanie was the one that would take over. I don't know if, Shane pretty much saw that and believed it, and that's why, he decided the writing was on the wall and it was time to leave. He went out and tried to get pay-per-view involved into China. He's been involved with a few other companies, which is, I think, have been a loss. Lucky for him that he has a wife that makes a lot of money. I think he's used all of his WWE money. He ended up coming back to the company in 2016. He wrestled at WrestleMania 32 against The Undertaker. And then he was in the company for a few years, kind of just bouncing around, doing different things. They put him in charge of the Royal Rumble one year, and he decided to make himself the new John Cena. He didn't win the thing, but out of the whole match, he was the one person you remembered. He was the one person that went on the big run. He was attacking everybody and just looking real strong. And at the end, everybody was pissed. Vince was pissed. Shane disrupted the locker room, and they let him go. And now we're at the point where Shane looks like he might join AEW. That rumor has been going on long enough. We just had Grand Slam tonight. He wasn't there, so maybe that rumor's going to die. We had All Out, All In, Grand Slam, the 3 big shows leading us into the fall for AEW, and he hasn't shown up yet. If he's going to show up, I think he would have shown up by now. But we'll have to see if this is the end of Shane in the wrestling business. But as that was wrapping up, just like the end of the last episode, just kind of like it was a flash forward of things to come without any words, without any things. It was just pictures. And we saw Benoit again, and then we saw a lot of the news stories about the allegations. So this last one is the last one. I think it's actually called The Finish. We're in 2009, so we got to get from 2009 to 2024, and we know that we're going to spend a lot of time in 2024, so we'll see how we get there. Peace out.